And so that's why I think the Preceon Smart Corn system is a really good way to really market and a really good way to help increase your yield. So what is the Preceon Smart Corn system? Well, there's actually a few different elements to it. First of all, it's short-statured corn hybrids. We know what those are. We've seen them probably in the past. Digital insights with digital programs like Climate View and Climate Field View. So what they're doing is they're using data to help place hybrids to see what your plant population should be. So if you think back to my last presentation, I talked about Billy Bean. He used data, he used statistics, and ended up getting the best result that he could with those players. So I think it's going to be good that if they use this, we can really increase yields through that. And then we have tailored agronomic support. So you'll have an agronomist there along the way to help you. So I want to talk about that short corn. So at the Crop Physiology Lab, we see 3 major benefits to using short corn. So what are those? The first one's in-season, extended in-season access. So I believe it was on June 19th when tar spot was first found in Illinois, or first confirmed. And so if we're getting this disease to come in earlier, we're going to have to make at least 1, maybe 2 fungicide applications to really combat that. And so you can get more equipment in with the shorter statured corn. The next one is improved tolerance to lodging. And so this is a picture of our farm in Yorkville, Illinois, northern Illinois. You can see we have a lot of downed corn. But if we look at our short corn up here, most of it's standing tall. And I'm not going to say that it's not going to fall over, but there's a much less likely chance that it will. You can see some other tall hybrids were able to withstand those 50 to 75 mile per hour winds. And so why is short corn able to stay standing? Well, we see that it has better nutrient partitioning, specifically in that stalk. So some of the data that we have is we've seen 11 to 18% larger stalk diameter. Now, I'm not saying we have more stalk on the plant. We actually have less stalk there. And the plant actually devotes more of its nutrition to the leaves, to the reproductive tissues. So it's putting it towards the important part where we're doing photosynthesis and really increasing our grain yield. So it's partitioning its nutrients better. But I'm only talking about above ground things. But what's going on below ground? We often forget about that. And so my PhD, my research objective is to characterize hybrids based on their root architecture. And so to do that, I had to develop a root rating. And so we grew 30 different hybrids in Champaign, with 3 of them were Preceon hybrids actually, and then we grew 27 of them in Yorkville in northern Illinois. So when we go out and dig roots, we're only digging a shovel worth deep. We know there's more fine roots going deeper than that, but the majority of your root system is in that first foot. So we are able to distinguish roots between different hybrids. So we go out there, we dig them, we wash them, we scan them, we weigh them, and I started my PhD in 2023, and we dug 1,006 roots. Now some people might think that's a lot, but I decided to triple that number, and in 2024 we dug 3,216 roots. And then again, I decided that wasn't enough, so the next year we will dig 3,672 roots next week and the following week after that. So probably going to be about 2 straight weeks of just digging and washing roots. So a lot of work goes into this. So really thankful for the team that we have. But they don't know it yet. This is what they might look like at the end of that 2 weeks. So just trying to prepare them for the worst. But very thankful for them. But we can dig all these roots, and I can brag about that, but we really need better ways to study them. And so what Dr. Tony Grift, who is an agricultural engineer at the University of Illinois, and Dr. Martin Bone, who is he's a corn breeder here, they developed the corn root observation platform, or the crop. And so with that, it can take a lot of different measurements all at one time. It's pretty simple, really. It's just a box with a camera on the side, a camera on the top. You put the root on that stake, and it's got a motor that spins it around, and it gets images like this. And so with this image, we can measure stalk diameter, which is how I got those measurements before. You can get root angle, which is a little bit of what Jared showed last talk. It can get surface area, and we also are weighing them for mass. But the main ones that I'm looking at is surface area, angle, and mass. And so the really important surface area is how much the root is contacting the soil. Angle is the direction it's growing. Is it growing towards or maybe even away from fertility? And then mass is kind of represents the amount of nutrition that that crop is devoting towards building that root system. So I looked at them all, I put them into one rating, and well, the acronym for surface area, angle, and mass spells SAM. So we're calling it the SAM rating, which I love because my name's Sam, so kind of got to name it after myself without even trying to. But integrates these three into the same characterization per hybrid. It separates each into two groups. So surface area and mass into either small or large, and then angle into either narrow or wide. So narrow's growing down, wide's growing out. So there's 8 different SAM ratings to help us really characterize hybrid root architecture. And so what do some of these hybrids look like? So we'll go through each one of them. These are some from Beck's hybrids that we grew. So 6128. It's a small surface area, narrow angle, and a small mass. And if you close your eyes and kind of think about, what that root might look like, it's, about exactly like that. The next one is a small surface area, wide angle, small mass. So it's not growing down very much. It's, it's growing wide. It's more of an umbrella-shaped root. So, exactly what that looks like. The next one, large surface area, wide angle, small mass. Now that might sound a little bit confusing, but surface area and mass are not necessarily related. So it's got a large surface area, so it's contacting a lot of soil. It's wide, so it's growing out, and it's got a small mass. So a lot of really fibrous roots on that root architecture. The next one is large, narrow, large. It's growing down, it's growing deep. The last one, large, wide, large, big roots, small roots, roots everywhere on that one. And so, these are just some of the differences that we see among these 5 hybrids. But if we're digging 30 hybrids, you can see huge variations between them. So if we look at Beck's, they had some of the narrowest roots out of all the 3 brands. If we look at Golden Harvest, they had some that were really big, really small, really wide, really narrow, kind of all over the board. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but they can definitely fit into different management systems. And then we had some differences with Bayer as well. But, I'm talking about short corn, so let's dive into Bayer a little bit more. So we have Channel, DeKalb, and our Preceon Smart Corn. And so the Channel tended to be a little bit bigger. A couple of them are pretty narrow angled hybrids. DeKalb was pretty average, maybe even a little bit smaller. And then the Preceon was actually quite a bit smaller. It's really not what I had thought. I thought, short corn, devoting less to above ground, maybe you're putting more energy into below ground, but that's not exactly what I found. And so when we compared it to 27 different hybrids, short corn hybrids actually had a smaller root architecture. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing because Bayer did some studies, and I think they dug roots at V6. And they actually found that the root grows deeper faster. So if these are growing deeper faster and they're smaller, that means they're probably reaching their full potential sooner, and they're probably able to take up more nutrients throughout the year, even though they are a little bit smaller. And so the next question I had was, how does hybrid root architecture affect our yield response to management? And so I think you have to ask a different question before you answer that, is how does management affect root architecture? Jared just showed a little bit of how strip till changes it, but what are some other managements that might change it? The one we see the most consistently is your plant density. You can see very clearly as we increase our plant density, we have a smaller root system. But actually, if you do the math, it's a 2.5% decrease in root mass per every 1,000 plant per acre increase. And so, as we keep striving for higher yields, we're getting these smaller roots. And so we're probably going to have to manage these smaller roots a little bit better to really see the benefits of some of the other managements that we're doing. And so the next thing I wanted to see, well, are these both root differences and our yield differences, are the responses to density similar between short and tall statured hybrids? And so we set up a trial, and we looked at 2 short hybrids and 2 tall hybrids, and we planted them at different densities. We've seen that in some of our past work that short corn really tolerates some of these higher densities, and you're really able to put more yield on. So we planted them at 32,000, 38,000, and pretty high at 44,000 plants per acre. And another question after that was, well, if we're planting at these higher plant populations, we're probably going to have smaller roots. Do we need a higher nitrogen rate? And so we did a titration of nitrogen as well. And so we implemented this trial, and then we dug some roots, and we were seeing some pretty big differences. So when we go from 32 to 38,000, I would expect a 15% decrease if it's 2.5% per every 1,000 plant. Now, obviously, there's not going to be exactly that every single time, but averaged over multiple hybrids, we see it very, very consistently. And so if you look at the hybrids, 9%, 14, 13, 21, ballpark 15%, going from 32 to 38. But what was interesting is when we went from 38 to 44, both short-statured hybrids only lost 6%, so quite a bit lower than what I was expecting. 6141, 18%, pretty on par. 6270, 7%, but you have to remember we lost 21% earlier going from 32 to 38. So if we go from 32 to 44, we're losing about 15% root mass per 6,000 plants on average. But that's not what we're seeing in that short corn. Short corn actually had a much more fixed root. And so if I show some results, some images that we took, I'm going to show 6141 and 11220. So very similar root architecture to begin with. So, 12.7 grams, 12.5 grams. So very similar. We go to 38,000 plants per acre. We did lose a little bit of root mass on both of them. But when we went to that really high rate, we did not lose as much in that short corn as we did in that tall corn. And so, pretty interesting there. We're able to keep our roots at these higher densities. So maybe that's why we're still able to respond better to higher plant densities in short corn. And so next I wanted to look at root mass on a per acre basis. Now that was per plant, but if we add up all the plants in per acre and add up all that roots, we can look at it on a per acre basis. And really, there's a lot of numbers going on here, but really the main story that we consistently see, especially with tall statured hybrids, is that there's really no change in your root biomass. Sure, you have more plants out there, but they have less mass per root, so it ends up being the same root mass per acre at higher plant populations. But when you look at short corn, remember, we weren't decreasing by as much, so we actually gained some root biomass at that 44,000 plants per acre. Again, probably another reason why we could potentially see higher grain yields at higher plant densities with that short corn. So the next thing I want to look at is obviously the grain yield. Did we actually see that? And so when we go from 32 to 38,000 plants per acre, 3 out of the 4 hybrids did like that higher plant population. But when we went from 38 to 44, both tall statured hybrids did not like 44,000. Just too high, we overdid it on the population. But those short statured hybrids, one of them, it kept going up. The other one was able to maintain and it was able to tolerate that stress of that higher plant density. And so again, it's probably a lot due to the roots. But remember that question, if we have smaller roots, do we need more nitrogen? If we have more plants, do we need more nitrogen at these higher plant population. So next I want to look at the effect of nitrogen, and we're just going to look at 2 of the hybrids for simplicity's sake. So we're looking at 6141. It's got the 3 densities, 32, 38, 44, and then we increase our nitrogen rate, 120 up to 240. And so with this tall statured hybrid, we were able to, we went from 32 to 38, 3 out of the 4 scenarios, we did increase our yield. But when we went to 44,000, again, at those 3 rates, we just overdid it. It was too many plants per acre. But now let's look at and actually our highest yield was 271 at that lowest plant population. So, you'd be spending more money if you're trying to increase both your nitrogen and your plant population. Let's look at one of the short-statured hybrids, 11220. And so when we increased our plant population in all 4 nitrogen rates, we increased our grain yield. And then when we went to 44,000, again, at all 4 nitrogen rates, we increased our yield again. Even at that 120 pounds rate, that's not very much nitrogen. It's really not being fed that much, but it's still increasing its yield at that low rate. And if you look at it, it's kind of interesting. At our lowest management, 120 pounds, 32,000, we have our lowest yield. And at our highest management, 44,240 pounds, that's where we have our highest yield. So we really see short corn has a really good response to management. So again, I think that's why it's a really good idea to have short corn in that Preceon system, so we can put multiple managements into account so we can really achieve the highest yields that we can. So the key takeaways to this trial is that higher plant densities decreased your root mass per plant for all hybrids, but your short corn hybrids were more fixed when responding to density, and so they're able to hold on to those roots with those higher plant populations. And then again, this may be one of the big reasons of why they have such high tolerance to those planting densities. If you're able to maintain your roots, you're able to keep getting those much needed nutrients. So the overall key takeaway is that short-statured hybrids really tend to be more yield responsive to managements. And we've seen this in this trial, and we've also seen it in other trials as well. So we're really excited about short corn. I think it's going to be definitely a great tool to use going forward. And farmers have to have their willingness to put things into a system, just like A-Rod put it into a system for the Yankees. So with that.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Good news for us short people.